get paid, manage risk, scale up. We do not just fly, we on the sky, sky commander, die, see, above, go, we on, get ahead.
Okay, let's get started.
Today we're taking, a pretty massive stack of guides, protocols, and industry frameworks that all center around one very specific, very high-stakes profession.
Yeah, it's quite the stack we've got to get through today.
It is, and, on the surface, if you just glance at the titles of these documents, it looks like we're talking about flying robots. It looks like Drone 101.
It definitely looks like that at first glance. And if you stop there, if you just read the titles, you really miss the entire point of the material.
Right. When I actually started reading through this stuff, the safety frameworks, the scoping guides, the communication protocols, I realized this isn't really about drones at all.
Oh, not at all.
It's a masterclass in consulting.
Yeah.
It's essentially a masterclass in risk management.
Exactly. The drone is really just the hardware. It's the tool. It's like a carpenter's hammer or a surgeon's scalpel. You don't hire a surgeon just because they own a really nice scalpel, right?
I hope not.
Right. You hire them because they know exactly where to cut and, maybe more importantly, where not to cut.
And that distinction brings us to the hook that grabbed me right at the very start of the source material. It's this concept called the drone stuff trap.
The trap, yeah. It's the thing that frankly kills more businesses in this industry than actual crashes do.
So paint the picture for us. What does this trap actually look like in the wild?
Okay, picture this. You've just bought a high-end enterprise drone, you've got your license, you set up a nice website, and your phone rings. It's a potential client, let's say a construction manager or maybe a commercial real estate developer.
Okay, sounds good so far.
And they say to you, hey, we just need some drone footage of our site. Can you come out and fly?
And the instinct, the visceral reaction for anyone running a business is to say, yes, absolutely, when and where.
Right, exactly. You say, I'm available Tuesday. I charge $500. Let's go. Yeah. You are so excited to get the work that you just agree immediately.
And the source material argues that in that moment, you've just lost the game.
You've completely lost. You walked right into the trap because when a client says, I need drone footage, they are speaking in shorthand.
Shorthand for what?
They're asking for a raw ingredient. It's like they're asking for a bag of flour and a carton of eggs, but what they actually need is a wedding cake. Or maybe they need a loaf of bread. Or, maybe they need to know if the bakery is actually burning down.
And if you just show up and hand them a bag of flour, which in this case is the raw video files, you haven't actually solved their underlying problem.
You haven't. And honestly, worse than that, you've positioned yourself as a commodity. If you are just the person who flies the drone, you are competing with literally every other person who bought a drone at Best Buy. You're selling flight time. And flight time is cheap.
So the core shift here, and this is really the red thread running through every single document we're covering in today's deep dive, is the transition from being a pilot to being a mission operator.
That's the exact terminology we need to lock in for this entire conversation. A pilot manipulates sticks to keep a machine in the air. A mission operator manages a professional campaign to extract data.
And the sources are very clear that the operator isn't selling video at all. They are selling something else entirely. They are selling confidence in a decision.
That is the key value proposition. Your clients aren't buying pixels. They are buying the ability to look at a roof and definitively say, yes, pay the contractor, or no, that work is substandard.
Right.
They're buying the certainty to tell a bank, the construction is 40% complete, go ahead and release the next round of funds. If your data doesn't give them that exact certainty, you failed. Doesn't matter how cinematic the video looks or how beautiful the sunset was.
So today, our mission for this deep dive is to dismantle the entire life cycle of a job through this operator lens. We're going to look at the discovery call, defining the deliverables, dealing with the reality of the physical site, the human element of getting approvals, and finally, how to close the deal and actually get paid.
It's essentially a blueprint for extreme professionalism.
Let's start right at the beginning. The phone rings. The source material refers to this as mission planning, but I think most people would just call it a sales call.
Which is exactly why most people absolutely hate it. They think they have to sell. They think they have to put on a performance.
But the guides suggest a very specific structure. They call it the 12-minute drone mission discovery call. Now, I'll be honest, when I saw 12 minutes, I thought, that is way too fast. How can you possibly plan a complex industrial inspection in 12 minutes?
Well, you can't plan the whole flight, but you can diagnose the mission. The goal of this call isn't to figure out, where you're going to stand or every single battery swap. The goal is to figure out if the mission is even possible. And to do that, you have to understand this concept they call the uncertainty ledger.
Okay, let's unpack this uncertainty ledger. Is this a physical document you fill out or more of a mental model?
It's primarily a mental model, though you should probably be taking notes as you speak. Imagine that the moment you pick up that phone, there is a giant ledger sitting between you and the client. On the left side, you have knowns. On the right side, you have unknowns.
And at the start of the call, I'm guessing the unknown side is incredibly heavy.
It's massive. It's essentially full of debt. You don't know the airspace class. You don't know if the site is right next to a school. You don't know if the client needs thermal data or just visual data. You don't even know if they need it tomorrow or next month.
And the pilot mindset, that amateur mindset we talked about earlier, is to basically ignore that debt. They just say, sure, I can do it.
They ignore the debt because they're afraid. They think that if they ask too many questions, the client will get annoyed and just hang up and call someone else. So they say yes, quickly, and they hang up the phone with that ledger still totally full of unknowns.
Which is effectively gambling.
It is gambling. You are borrowing luck. You're betting your commercial license, your insurance policy, and your entire reputation that when you show up on Tuesday, the airspace will magically be clear, the weather will be perfect, and the client will be thrilled with whatever you happen to shoot.
And the text makes a great point here. In aviation, when you borrow luck, the interest rate is catastrophic.
It really is. So the operator uses that 12-minute call to aggressively pay down that debt. You are acting as an investigator. You're asking highly specific questions to move items from the unknown column over to the known column, or at the very least, moving them to a verification column, which are tasks you need to go look up immediately after the call.
Let's look at the specific tool they use for doing this. The sources call it the outcome first question set. I found this fascinating because it completely flips the usual script. Usually people pick up the phone and ask, what do you want me to fly?
Right. Do you want photos or do you want video? That is a classic commodity question. The operator doesn't ask that. The operator asks, what decision will this data support?
Give me a concrete example of how that one question changes the whole trajectory of the job.
Okay. Let's say a client calls you about a large warehouse roof. If I ask, do you want photos? They'll say yes. So I go out, I fly at sunset because as a photographer, I know the light is beautiful then. I send them these gorgeous, dramatic, golden hour photos of their roof.
It sounds like you did a great job.
It sounds great until the client calls me back screaming the next day. Because it turns out the decision they needed to make was, do we have hail damage on this roof?
And sunset lighting is bad for identifying hail damage.
Sunset lighting creates long, dramatic shadows. It completely hides the surface texture. To see hail hits, which are just these tiny little pock marks in the material, you need flat, harsh lighting. You actually need to fly right at noon with the camera pointing straight down. By flying at sunset, I gave them art, but I completely failed to give them evidence.
So if you had just asked, what decision are you making? You would have immediately learned, oh, we're filing an insurance claim for a hailstorm.
Bingo! Now I know I'm operating in diagnose mode, not persuade mode.
And that perfectly sets up this next concept, which is called the skeptic test. Now, reading through the documents, I have to say, this feels a little aggressive to say to a client. The source suggests you actually ask them. If someone disagrees with your decision later, what would they argue and what would you need to show to shut that argument down?
It does feel aggressive if you say it with an attitude, but if you say it with genuine curiosity, it is actually the most protective, valuable thing you can do for that client.
How so? Walk me through that.
Because you are actively helping them build their defense. Let's stick with that warehouse roof example. The client, let's say they're a facility manager, is going to take your photos and show them to an insurance adjuster. Now, the adjuster's entire job is to say no. The adjuster is going to look at the photos and say, that's not new hail damage, that's just old wear and tear or blisters in the tar from the sun.
So you're asking the facility manager to anticipate that exact fight before you even launch the drone.
Yes. You're saying, Mr. Client, when that adjuster tries to deny this claim, what proof will you wish you had in your hands? And the client might stop and think, well, I'd need to prove the damage is fresh, so I'd need a clear timestamp, and I'd need to see the actual granule loss on the shingles really clearly.
And suddenly, just like that, you have your technical mission specs.
Yeah.
You know you need high-resolution, extreme close-up, time-stamped imagery.
Precisely. You aren't just taking pictures anymore. You are gathering forensic evidence for a future boardroom argument or even a court case. That is high-value consulting. That's what an operator does.
The source material actually categorizes these client decisions into 5 distinct buckets. They are document, diagnose, prioritize, verify, and persuade. We just touched on diagnose. And you mentioned persuade earlier with the sunset real estate shots. What about verify?
Verify is huge in the construction industry. It's answering the question, did the contractors actually pour the concrete for the foundation yet? Because the bank will not release the next $1 million draw until they verify that specific work is done. In that scenario, your drone is acting as an independent auditor.
And what about prioritize?
That's usually asset management. Imagine a county engineer says, we have 50 bridges in our district, but we only have the budget to repair 3 of them this year. Which 3 are in the worst shape? You fly all 50 bridges specifically to create a prioritized repair list.
It seems like if you don't know which of those 5 buckets you're operating in, you simply cannot plan the mission.
You can fly the drone, sure, but you absolutely cannot complete the mission.
Let's transition into section 2 of the material, defining the deliverable. This is the what of the job. The sources describe this concept of a deliverables pyramid. I think a lot of people just assume the deliverable is always the files.
Right, and that is just layer 1 of the pyramid, raw capture. Those are the JPGs and MP4s straight off the SD card.
A bag of flour.
The bag of flour. And honestly, for a busy corporate client, layer 1 is almost a nuisance. If I hand a busy project manager a digital folder containing 400 raw images labeled DSC001 through DSC400, I haven't helped them. I've just given them a massive homework assignment. They have to open every single file just to figure out what they're looking at.
The text mentions layer 2 is curated media that's renamed, sorted, maybe color corrected. Better, but still just files at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's the bare minimum for being a professional. But the real value jump, what the text actually calls the trust explosion, happens at layer 3, which is labeled evidence.
Talk to me about labeling. Why is drawing a simple red box on a photo considered so incredibly valuable?
It's all about reducing cognitive load. That's the fancy academic term. In plain English, it saves the client brain power. If I sent an engineer a photo of a bridge with a bright red arrow pointing to a rusted bolt and a text callout that says North Span Connection 4, 30% corrosion, that engineer looks at it and instantly understands the reality of the site. They don't have to hunt for the problem.
You've already done the analytical thinking for them.
You've processed the raw data. You've turned a pretty picture of a bridge into a highly specific report on structural corrosion. And clients will gladly pay double or triple your standard rate for that level of processing because it saves them hours of their own time.
And that leads directly into what the guides call the wingman challenge. This is essentially a test to see how well you've actually defined these deliverables during the discovery phase.
Right. The test is this. Can you write out your mission specs in one single paragraph so clearly and completely that you could hand that paragraph to a total stranger, your wingman, and they could go drive to the site and fly it exactly as you imagine without ever having to call you for clarification?
Honestly, that sounds incredibly difficult to do.
It is really difficult because humans constantly rely on assumptions. We tell ourselves, oh, I'll just get some photos of the building. But if you hand that instruction to your wingman, they might go out and take wide-angle shots from 400 feet up. And you'll look at the data and scream, no, I needed macro close-ups of the 3rd floor windows.
But you never actually defined the specs.
Right, so the specs need to be ruthlessly granular. We're talking about things like GSD ground sampling distance.
But let's define that for the listener, because that's a crucial term in the source documents.
GSD is basically answering the question, how big is one single pixel in the real world? If your GSD is 5 centimeters per pixel, you can easily see a car on the ground. But you definitely cannot see a hairline crack in the pavement. If the client's decision requires them to measure pavement cracks, you need a GSD of maybe 0.5 centimeters per pixel.
So if you don't explicitly specify the required GSD in your planning, the pilot might fly way too high, and the resulting data is entirely useless for the client's decision.
Exactly. It's a total failure. You also have to specify file formats. Does the client want standard JPGs or do they want raw files like DNGs?
Why does that specific format distinction matter so much?
Well, raw files give you massive latitude for editing later. If you accidentally underexpose the shot, you can usually save it in post-production. But they're huge files, and more importantly, you need specialized software just to open them.
Ah, right.
If you send a corporate client 500 DNG files and they only have basic Windows Photo Viewer installed on their laptop, they literally cannot open their deliverable. They will call you panicking, thinking the files are completely corrupted.
So part of the operator's job is asking up front, what specific software will you be using to view these files on your end?
Yes, that is a perfect example of a wingman level detail.
Another fascinating detail was the section on naming conventions. The source forcefully suggests using a format like, let me read this, YYYYMDD client-side asset view sequence. I mean, that is a mouthful of a file name.
It looks intimidating, but you really have to think about the future. Imagine 5 years from now, that client's main server crashes. They're digging through a backup hard drive, trying to find old inspection records. If they see a file named DSC099.jpg, they have absolutely no idea what it is. They'll probably just delete it.
But if they see a file named 2026-0221 Smith Corp Factory Roof North.jpg.
Exactly. They know exactly what it is, exactly when it was taken, and exactly where it belongs. The file name itself acts as metadata. It tells a complete story before you even open the image. Professional archiving like that is admittedly boring, but it is exactly what separates the real pros from the amateurs.
All right, let's move into section 3. The where and the when. We're moving from the digital files into the physical site reality. The phrase, the map versus the territory, kept coming up in the text over and over.
It's a classic planning problem. You look at the proposed mission location on Google Maps from the comfort of your office, and it looks like a nice, big, open field right next to a highway. Looks like an incredibly easy flight.
But the danger is that Google Maps is effectively a historical document.
That's exactly it. That satellite image might be 2 or 3 years old. So you show up to the site on Tuesday morning, and guess what? That open field is now a massive active construction site with 3 giant tower cranes and a huge magnetic interference zone from the steel framing.
So the guide stresses that during the discovery call, you have to explicitly ask what moves on the site.
What moves and what has changed since the last satellite update. You have to ask specifically about temporary hazards. Cranes are the biggest one because they are tall, they are metal, and they swing unpredictably. A flight path that is perfectly safe at 8:00 a.m. might be instantly lethal at 8:05 a.m. if the crane operator decides to rotate the boom into your airspace.
The sources also mentioned asking about animals, which I wouldn't have thought of.
Oh, birds of prey are a huge factor. If you are flying during nesting season, a hawk or an eagle sees your drone as either a direct threat to their nest or a territorial rival. And they will attack it, and they will usually win. Google Maps does not have a layer that shows you the angry hawk zone.
Why?
You actually have to ask the local site manager on the ground, hey, do you guys have any aggressive bird problems around here?
Let's talk about the scheduling aspect. The documents outline this 4 clocks model. I think this is a brilliant way to visualize why scheduling these missions is so notoriously difficult.
It perfectly explains why saying, I'll be there tomorrow, is such a dangerous promise to make to a client. Because for a professional mission to happen, 4 distinct clocks have to align perfectly.
Okay, let's walk through them. Clock 1 is the legal window.
This is all about regulations. When are you legally allowed to fly? Are you restricted to daylight hours only? Is there a TFR, a temporary flight restriction, active because of a VIP visit? Because if the president is in town, your legal window is slam shut, period. It doesn't matter what the client wants.
Then clock 2 is the site window.
This is physical access. When is the front gate actually unlocked? When is the security guard going to be there to let your vehicle in?
Clock 3 is the safety window.
This covers weather conditions and active site hazards. And this is where things get really tricky for the operator. Let's say the legal window is open. It's bright daylight. The site window is open. The gate is unlocked. But the wind is suddenly gusting to 35 miles per hour. That means your safety window is closed.
And finally, clock 4, the deliverable window.
That's the client's internal deadline. It's when they say, I absolutely need this data for a board meeting on Friday morning.
So reading between the lines here, the absolute nightmare scenario is when the deliverable window starts squeezing the safety window.
That is the classic textbook accident chain in aviation. The client says, I need it for Friday. It's currently Thursday afternoon. A massive thunderstorm is rolling in. You have permission from the FAA, so the legal clock is fine. You have access to the site, but it's clearly unsafe to fly. An amateur pilot thinks, I have to fly to hit this deadline or I lose the client. An operator thinks, the safety window is firmly closed. We have to negotiate moving the deliverable window.
But saying no to a client with a deadline takes real guts.
It takes immense confidence. It takes calmly explaining to the client, listen, I can fly right now and risk crashing a machine into your new building, or I can fly on Monday when the weather clears and give you absolutely perfect, usable data. When you frame it like that, they usually wait till Monday.
Speaking of the legal window, we really need to touch on airspace management. The source material goes out of its way to distinguish between the U.S. and Canadian regulatory systems.
The underlying physics of airspace are the same globally, but the bureaucracy differs wildly.
Right. In the U.S., operating under the FAA, we have the LAANC system.
Low altitude authorization and notification capability. It's honestly a fantastic piece of infrastructure. It's an app-based system where, for a vast majority of controlled airports, you can get near instantaneous approval to fly. You type in your parameters, tap a button, you get a text message back in seconds, and you are legally cleared.
But the text notes that LAANC doesn't cover everywhere.
No, it doesn't. Some sensitive areas are drone zone only. That is the FAA's manual portal. You have to submit a written request, and an actual human being at the FAA has to read it and review it. And that process can take days or sometimes weeks to clear.
And what's the nuance for operators up in Canada?
Transport Canada is actually stricter in several ways. They divide pilots into basic and advanced certificate tiers. If you want to fly anywhere near a controlled airport, or if you need to fly over bystanders, you must hold that advanced certificate, and you have to use a specific model of drone that carries a manufacturer safety rating.
And their authorization system.
They typically use a system called NAV Drone to request airspace authorization from AV Canada. It is a robust system, but it's often not as purely instantaneous as the US LANC system can be. You have to build in lead time.
Which brings us to a major strategic takeaway from the text. It's not just about memorizing these acronyms. It's about utilizing what they call the GATE strategy.
Yes, the rule is never, ever promise a firm date to a client until you have personally checked the airspace map. You treat that airspace authorization as a hard gate in your workflow. You tell the client, I am fully ready to fly on Thursday, subject to the FAA or Navi Canada opening the gate for us.
I see. You essentially make the federal regulator the bad guy.
Exactly. You reframe it. I'm not the one delaying your project. The federal government is currently processing our security request. Clients generally respect federal regulations. They do not respect you just saying, oh, I'm not ready yet.
That's incredibly smart. Okay, moving into section 4. The human element. We've talked extensively about the physical site, but let's talk about the people involved. The source warns very strongly about something called the monolith fallacy, which is the mistake of thinking the client is just one single person.
It is almost never one single person. Even when you're dealing with small, local companies, there are usually 5 distinct roles hiding inside that singular word, client.
Let's break those 5 roles down for the listener, because this seems crucial for getting paid. First up is the sponsor.
The sponsor is usually the person who actually picked up the phone and called you. They are the one feeling the pain of the problem. They want the drone data. They are effectively your champion on the inside.
Next is the approver.
The approver is the person with the checkbook. They hold the budget authority. They might not know or care about drones at all. They just care about whether this expense fits into their quarterly budget.
Then we have the reviewer. Now, reading the documents, this role feels like the primary villain in our story.
The reviewer is absolutely the primary source of scope creep. This is usually someone like a marketing director or maybe a senior technical lead who only sees the footage after you've already shot it and delivered it. And they're the one who chimes in and says, well, this is pretty good, but can we get a shot from the north side? Or the sky looks a little too gray. Can you go back and fix it?
And if you didn't identify that reviewer early on in the planning phase, they can completely wreck your profitability.
Exactly, because you end up going back out to the site and doing those revisions entirely for free just to get the job closed out.
Role number 4 is the end user, and role number 5 is the gatekeeper.
The end user is the person actually sitting at a desk measuring the crack in the concrete using your files. If you never talk to them directly, you might deliver the wrong GSD, and they can't do their job. And the gatekeeper, as we touched on earlier, is literally the security guard at the front booth of the site.
I loved the specific note the guide made about the gatekeeper. It said, the CEO can sign the contract, but the guard at the gate can stop the truck.
It is 100% true. If that guard does not have your specific name written on their clipboard that morning, you are not getting into that facility. It genuinely does not matter if you play golf with the owner of the company. So a massive part of your mission planning is asking, who exactly needs to know I'm showing up on Tuesday?
Now let's talk about red flags. We all have a certain gut instinct when a deal feels off, but the source actually codifies them. And rush timelines is highlighted as a massive red flag. When a client says, I need it tomorrow,
Urgency in this business is almost always a proxy for internal chaos. If a corporate client suddenly needs aerial data tomorrow, it almost certainly means somebody forgot to plan yesterday. And clients who don't plan ahead are usually disorganized about paying their invoices, they are disorganized about site safety, and they generally have wildly unrealistic expectations about what you can achieve.
So how does an operator handle that "I need it tomorrow" phone call without just turning down the revenue?
You apply a rush fee. Not just because you want to make more money, but to actively test their claim of urgency. If you say, "I can do tomorrow, but there is a 20% rush fee applied," and they suddenly balk and say, "Oh, well, next week is fine," then they didn't really need it tomorrow.
And if they agree?
If they pay that fee without blinking, you know they are truly desperate. And when a client is desperate, you need to be extraordinarily careful about your safety parameters because they will absolutely push you to cut corners to save their own skin.
Another codified red flag. The committee.
Oh, man. This is death by 1,000 emails. This is when the sponsor says, "Okay, send the rough draft to me and also copy Bob and Susan and the lead architect."
And then you inevitably get 4 different reply emails with completely contradictory feedback. Bob says he wants the background music louder. Susan says she wants it softer. The architect wants a different angle.
Right. And you're stuck in the middle. The operator shuts this dynamic down immediately in the kickoff meeting. You invoke what's called the single point of contact rule. You tell them, "I will happily accept your feedback and revisions, but it must be consolidated into one single list delivered by one specific person." You force them to fight out their internal disagreements before they bring it to you.
That is incredibly practical advice.
All right, section 5, money and time. Or, as the sources elegantly phrase it, scoping without awkwardness.
We really have to train ourselves to stop thinking of this phase as sales. You're not selling used cars, it's engineering constraints.
I really like that psychological reframe.
Think about it. If you were a civil engineer designing a bridge for a city, you would ask up front, what is the total budget for this project? Because that number instantly dictates whether you are designing a simple wooden footbridge or a massive steel suspension bridge. Asking for the budget isn't rude, it's just physics. You need the parameters to design the solution. To help with this, the text introduces the scope, speed, strength triangle.
Yeah.
Now, this is a classic project management tool, but it's applied here specifically to aerial data capture.
Right. You have these 3 corners of the triangle. Scope refers to how much total area you're covering. Are we mapping 1 building or 10? Speed is the turnaround time. How fast do you need the final files? And strength is the quality or density of the data. Are we talking about basic low-res photos or centimeter-level survey accuracy with full labeling?
And the golden rule of the triangle is the client only gets to pick 2.
You can almost never deliver all 3 simultaneously without breaking something or losing money.
Let's do a quick role play to demonstrate this. I'll be a difficult, demanding client.
Yeah.
Listen, I need you to map my entire 500-acre ranch. So that's high scope. I need centimeter level accuracy because we're doing a complex flood study, so high strength. And I need the final data on my desk by tomorrow morning, high speed. But my total budget is only $500.
Okay, as the operator, I don't just say, "No, you're crazy." I say, "All right, looking at the project triangle, we have a conflict with those constraints. For a budget of $500 and a strict 24-hour turnaround, I can definitely give you the high speed. But we have to drop either the scope or the strength. For that price, I can map just the main house area low scope with the high accuracy you need. Or I can fly the entire 500-acre ranch high scope, but just give you a rough visual overview with absolutely no survey accuracy low strength."
That is brilliant because you put the difficult trade-off right back onto their plate.
Exactly. You ask them which of these factors is ultimately more important to your project, hitting tomorrow's deadline or getting the survey grade accuracy.
That feels so much more empowering than just awkwardly apologizing for your high pricing.
It completely changes the power dynamic of the call. You aren't haggling over pennies. You are acting as an expert, collaboratively designing a solution that actually fits their physical constraints.
There is one absolutely critical point in this section regarding liability that we have to cover. It's the stark distinction between providing observations and providing conclusions.
Yes, this is exactly where overly eager pilots end up getting sued.
Give me the dangerous phrase. What is the thing you should never say?
The most dangerous phrase you can put in a report is, "The roof is leaking."
Why is that so dangerous? It seems helpful.
Because leaking is a definitive engineering conclusion. It strongly implies that you know for a fact that exterior water is penetrating the membrane. If you write, the roof is leaking, and the client pays a contractor $50,000 to patch the roof, and then it turns out the water was actually coming from a burst HVAC pipe inside the wall, you are now legally liable. You diagnosed the problem incorrectly, and they spent money based on your diagnosis.
So what is the exact phrasing the operator should use instead?
You would write, thermal anomaly detected in section 4 of the roof membrane, or standing water observed pooling near the primary drain.
You just strictly report the visible data.
You only report the verifiable facts. You let their licensed structural engineer draw the actual conclusion. You make it clear. I am a data capture specialist. I am not a structural engineer. I provide the high-quality evidence. You make the professional judgment. That one simple semantic distinction is your ultimate legal armor in this business.
Wow. Okay, section 6, the system. We've survived the discovery call. We've successfully scoped the mission. We've navigated the triangle. Now we need to actually land the plane. Metaphorically speaking, we have to close the deal.
And for this, the sources offer the TRUST framework. TRUST. It's a structured acronym to ensure you don't just awkwardly ramble at the end of a great phone call.
Let's go through the letters. T stands for transition.
Right. You say something like, okay, I think I have a clear picture of what we need here. You clearly signal that the exploration phase is over and we are moving to the close.
R is recap outcome.
So our main goal today is to gather undeniable evidence to support your hail damage claim. You actively remind them of the high-value result you are delivering.
U is unpack scope.
To do that, we'll be flying the north side of the warehouse, executing a noon flight for flat lighting, and delivering high-resolution labeled imagery.
S is surface constraints.
This is your final no surprises check. We are tentatively confirmed for Thursday morning, provided the airspace authorization clears and the front gate security has my vehicle logged.
And finally, T is task next steps.
I will email you the formal quote within 1 hour. I need you to reply with the exact site address coordinates by 5 p.m. today so I can check the airspace.
And then importantly, you hang up the phone.
You hang up, you don't keep chatting, and then you immediately send what the guide calls the recap email.
The source material refers to this email as the contract in plain English. Why is this seemingly simple email so vital to the entire process?
Because human memory is notoriously terrible. Literally 5 minutes after you hang up, the client forgets that you explicitly said weather permitting. They forget that you agreed to JPGs only.
So you force it into writing.
You put it in clean bullet points. Scope, north warehouse roof, constraints, weather and airspace dependent, deliverable, layer 3 labeled JPGs. If they reply to that email with agreed, you now have a legally binding, plain English record of the exact expectations.
And there is one magic sentence that the source insists must be included in the bottom of this recap email.
Oh, yes. If anyone else on your team needs to approve this scope or this budget, please add them to this email thread right now.
That is designed to flesh out the hidden approvers we talked about earlier.
It completely saves you from the surprise boss scenario. If the person you're talking to replies, oh, actually, my regional manager, Bob, needs to review all drone flights, you just saved yourself weeks of wasted effort. You can get Bob on board now before you ever put a battery on the charger.
Finally, let's talk about building mission profiles for repeat work. Because as the text points out, the holy grail of this business isn't landing one single job, it's securing the recurring long-term contract.
You want to become frictionless for your clients. If a construction company hires you for a second site visit, you should never have to ask them, hey, where do I park again? Or who do I send the invoice to?
So you actively build out a cockpit card for every recurring client.
Ideally, yes. It's basically a quick reference cheat sheet for your business. It says, client, Acme Construction, main contact, Sarah. Safety requirements, orange vests and steel toes mandatory. Invoicing. Send PDF to billing at acme.com on the 15th. Naming convention. YYYYMMDD Acme.
And you just read that card for 30 seconds before you dial their number.
And suddenly you sound like an absolute genius on the phone. You just casually drop in, hey, Sarah, should I send this invoice over to the usual billing address? And Sarah thinks, wow, this operator is incredibly organized. They actually know me.
It's basically B2B intimacy.
It really is.
Yeah.
And having those profiles allows you to build out default mission kits on your computer. If you specialize in monthly construction progress reports, you just have a blank folder structure already built. You have a standard shot list already saved. You aren't starting from zero every single Monday morning.
We have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground in this deep dive. We started all the way back with the trap, the simple, dangerous request of, I need drone footage.
And we walked step by step through how to dismantle that amateur request and rebuild it into a highly professional, profitable mission.
We talked about the uncertainty ledger, the deliverables pyramid, the 4 clocks of scheduling, the scope triangle, and finally, the trust closing framework.
It is admittedly a lot of frameworks to absorb, but they all serve that one ultimate goal we stated at the beginning: moving the client from a state of uncertainty to a state of absolute certainty.
And that, fundamentally, is the operator advantage.
It is. The amateur focuses all their energy on the flying. The professional operator focuses all their energy on the closing and the decision-making.
I want to leave the listener with that final provocation we touched on earlier in the discussion, the skeptic test, because I think it applies far beyond just flying drones.
It really is the most powerful cognitive tool in your entire kit. On your very next project, whether you are flying a drone or you're building a new website or you're writing a piece of software code, I want you to ask yourself, if someone disagrees with my final decision later on, what exact evidence will I wish I had in my hand to shut their argument down?
That is a phenomenal question, because if you can clearly answer that before you start the work, you aren't just doing a job anymore. You are truly operating.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.